What's up, Yinzers and Yinzettes? Welcome to the inaugural edition of Pucks and Nat, where we're going to bring you the very latest and very best Pittsburgh Penguins news coverage and just the general talk of the day. We're really excited for this. We have a really good episode for you today. We're going to talk about this crazy week in Penguins hockey, as well as some of these young guys that are going to get a shot as a result of some of that craziness. We're going to talk who's trending up, who's trending down, and finally, we're going to talk a little bit about trades too. So stick with us and we'll have lots more in that. Welcome. We're happy to have you today. I am Kelsey Surmacz. I am one of your hosts for the Pucks and Nat podcast. And we're really excited to be here today. Just to let you know, I write for the Hockey News, just in case you're unfamiliar. I'm the Pittsburgh Penguins site editor and reporter. You can find me on X at Kelsey_Surmacz4. You can find me basically on the same name on other platforms such as Blue Sky and Threads. And I am joined by my lovely co-host, Hannah Kirkell.
Hi guys, I'm Hannah Kirkell. I am on Twitter at H_Kirk6. You can find me on Blue Sky at HKirk6, no underscore. And I'm on Threads at Kirkell6.
Yeah, and I got to tell you guys, me and Hannah this has been in the works for a while.
I believe the first talk of this was in March.
Yes. It's been a long time.
This is over 7 months in the making.
Yes. And, we're excited to bring this to you. We'd love to hear your feedback. You'll be able to find this wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify. Check on down the list. But yeah, give us your feedback. We're going to try to make this as interactive as possible too. You might even make an appearance on the show at some point. Who knows? And we'd also love to expand. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your ma, tell your pa, tell your grandma. Just tell everyone. Spread the word. We'd love to get ourselves out there and hopefully eventually make this a multiple times per week thing. As a side note, we're having a Friday special episode today. It has been a crazy week, as I said in the intro. So we want to cover some of the stuff that has happened this week, but normally this is going to come out every Wednesday. So this will be a Wednesday show, released on Wednesday afternoons. But, we just needed to talk today. We needed to get this out today. So let's jump right in and get started with our first topic. So which is that crazy week in Penguins hockey that started Monday with, I guess, what you would call a hockey game.
I would consider it. I would say it was more of a bloodbath. The Pittsburgh Penguins lost 7-1 to the Dallas Stars at home. They let up 6 goals in the first period, and according to Bob Grove, an excellent Penguins historian,
Absolutely.
This is the first time that the Penguins have given up 6 goals in the first period on home ice. So, if you want to call it a hockey game, you are free to. I'm not sure there was much hockey being played on the Penguins side, at least. The Dallas Stars played a very good game, and you really got the feeling they could have put up more, but they kind of laid off after scoring 6 in the first period. Again, I repeat, 6 in the first period.
Yeah, Hannah, I got to tell you that I have been watching Penguins hockey for a long time. That is the worst period I've ever seen this team play. And that's counting the X generation. That's counting those dark years, Crosby's rookie year. There's nothing that compares to what I witnessed in the first period. And I do want to add, it was crazy being in the media suite at that game too. You hear everything from up there. But, it was boos the entire period. And then, when they announced the 1 minute remaining in the period, there was this really loud chorus of cheers.
There was a Bronx cheer for the ages.
There was. So people couldn't wait for it to be over. I can't say I felt any differently. Same with the media suite. It gave us some stuff to write about, but nothing you want to see happen. So that's how the Penguins week started out. And it had consequences because the very next day, the Penguins traded center Lars Eller for the 2025 7th round pick and a 2020 or 5th round pick, I'm sorry, and 2027 3rd round pick, which Hannah, I believe Kyle Dubas has had some history with that second pick there.
Yes. So that 3rd round pick, even though it came from Washington, it was actually Chicago's third. It's Chicago's 3rd round pick in 2027. That pick has been moved, I believe, 5 times, and Kyle Dubas traded for it when he was the general manager in Toronto. So
rumors abound, and you know what? There's a lot of talk about some more trades on the horizon, which we'll get to
that later.
Yes, we'll get to that later. But who knows? Maybe Dubas trades that pick again, and
you never know. But yeah, so next day, Wednesday, it was a 3-2 overtime loss to Detroit at home. It was a better effort. I mean, to be fair, the bar was very low considering their last game. They gave up 6 goals in the first period. I'm going to keep repeating that just to make sure it sticks. It was a much better effort. I mean, the first period, it was a period and hockey was played. It was very low event. You kind of got the sense that both teams were feeling each other out and just focusing defense first. But it was a good defensive period from the Penguins. The second period did not start off super well. Detroit scored twice. The Penguins went down 2-0, but they did not fold. They rallied back and they tied the game up. And they ultimately did fall in overtime, but it wasn't for lack of chances. They had several breakaways right before the end of the third period and also in overtime that they just couldn't finish.
Absolutely. And I think that was a good response game from the Penguins, especially after Monday's game and after the Eller trade. Emotions were running high. Eller was very highly respected, the guy in the locker room, and he was a very highly respected guy within media circles too. So, I think that was a good response game. As you mentioned, that first period, it was boring, and Mike Sullivan even said that they could have come out a little flat just because they were being overly cautious and a little bit too careful not to give up 6 goals again, as we've repeated. But it was a really good defensive period from them. I think one of their best defensive periods of the season, and it was boring hockey. And you know what? Boring hockey, when you're talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins, isn't always bad hockey. It was low event, as you said, and not much happening, which worked out well for them because they really took over the game after Detroit scored their 2 goals early in the second. So that was the response game. And then we move on to Thursday because there was a little bit of a travesty that did happen during Wednesday's game.
Yes.
So
early in the first period, they entered the game with 12 healthy forwards. They left with only 11. How did that happen? Well, Blake Lizotte must have really ticked off the hockey gods because, he's in the blue paint and Drew O'Connor fires a blind shot and cold cocks him and he drops like a shot and there's blood everywhere. And this is not the first time that Blake Lizotte has been taken down by a friendly fire shot. If you remember, during the Sudbury game, he was on the bench and Letang, went to clear the puck. Their arena's a little different than is, NHL standard. So that clearing attempt turned into Lizotte once again, for the first time, getting struck in the head and concussed. And it's a real pity that it happened again because, he just came back from injured reserve. He played 5 games. He played very well. And now he's seemingly down again. So they sent down Yoel Blomqvist and called up Matt Nieto and Vasily Ponomarev.
Yes, and that was the response move to Wednesday's events. And, in terms of Blomqvist, we'll get into this a little bit later with the goaltending too, but he did give up those 2 soft goals early on to Dallas. Prior to that, he was kind of playing like the Penguins' best goaltender. I had kind of one stinker of a game. He gave up 3 goals on 8 shots. Ned got the net on Wednesday. Immediately after Wednesday's events, Thursday morning, they send down Blomqvist, get him more starts at the AHL level. And obviously, when you only have 11 healthy forwards, can't really carry 3 goaltenders on a roster. You got to carry extra forwards. So they called up those 2. But that wasn't the end of it, because the very next morning, this morning, we get the news that they have recalled defenseman Owen Pickering from the AHL. Pickering just scored his first goal in professional hockey the other night, so he's coming off kind of a high there. And we'll get into this a little bit later with lineups and everything. It does appear that he's going to be a scratch tonight. Chris Letang is out with an illness. But what's interesting here, and from what I understand, this didn't look like an emergency recall. So yeah, with Pickering, coming, with Pickering coming up, at least it wasn't indicated that way. Which I mean, I can check into in a couple minutes here just to make sure. But what's interesting about that is with Pickering here, they're going to have to make a subsequent roster move, because Lizotte, as far as we know, isn't on IR yet. And obviously Letang's out with illness, so we'll kind of see what happens there. Like I said, there's no indication at this point that it's an emergency recall, but
especially since one more thing, Pickering plays on the left side traditionally. Yes. And if this was an emergency recall, Chris Letang is, he plays on the right side. And Mike Sullivan likes to, he's notorious for liking to keep that consistent. So that's just, one more thing to worry about. Maybe not worry, but keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I thought that was interesting. That kind of stood out to me that it wasn't designated as an emergency recall. So I think the easy assumption is Lizotte's probably headed to IR, but we don't know that. There's no information at this point. And the Penguins are on the road in Columbus. They started back-to-back tonight with Columbus, and then they're going to be playing San Jose at home tomorrow. So we'll see what happens and what transpires over the next few hours and the next 24 hours. It should get pretty interesting here. But I do want to talk about some of these young guys that might be getting a shot here. And as we said, from the lines, which Hannah will read you off the lines in a second here, it does appear that both Vasily Ponomarev and Owen Pickering probably aren't going to figure into the lineup tonight, but not necessarily any real cause for concern yet.
No, especially considering they're playing San Jose tomorrow at home. It makes a little bit more sense to give these guys a practice or two before throwing them into game action. Ponomarev, he's played 2 NHL games. In those 2 games, he's done very well. He's scored a goal. He's got 2 points. But, still it's a different game. It's a different speed. It's a different level. And Owen Pickering, when he plays, it'll be his first NHL game. So it's not yet a cause for concern. I would say it's pretty likely that they both slot in tomorrow night at home. Right? Would you agree with that?
I would say so. And also,
at least one of them,
Yeah, I just saw word too that Blake Lizotte has been officially diagnosed with another concussion. So probably he's had a IR. He's on concussion IR.
Yeah,
so
2 concussions in less than 3 months.
Yeah, that's just unfortunate.
That is not a good concern. That's not a good sign. That's cause for concern.
And it's as you mentioned already, just crazy luck from him. But back to the young guys for a second. So I've talked at length about Vasily Ponomarev, and I think this is a guy that Penguins fans should be pretty legitimately excited for. Because, with the trade of Lars Eller, plus they're down Lizotte, they're down Cody Glass, they're down Kevin Hayes, they're down 4 centers just from where they were a few days ago. So this is no small thing. We know Kyle Dubas loaded up on centers in the offseason. So,
which is a good thing because it's November 15th and they are dropping like flies.
Yeah.
He had the right idea.
He did. Thinking ahead there. So, injuries are inevitable, but you start to see them pile up like this. The difference this season is that the Penguins really have, this crop of young players that they haven't had in quite some time. Ponomarev's one of them. And I think, honestly, if you're looking at just a pure role placement standpoint, he's probably the closest thing to Eller you're going to get right now, just in terms of his role. Ponomarev is really good defensively. That's kind of like a key skill set for him. His defense is already NHL caliber. He plays really well in the penalty kill, good stick work, good reads. He clogs up passing and shooting lanes. And as Sullivan has said, which, by the way, Sullivan and Dubas are really high on this guy. They loved his training camp. I believe that, had he not gotten injured during training camp, I do think he probably would have made the roster ahead of some other guys like McGroarty and Pusanen even. But they love his motor, and, he's a good defensive player. So he can really burn opposing teams, on the way back from the defensive zone. And he's going to break out. So you're going to like this guy. Great along the walls. He battles. He's got a lot of energy, wins a lot of puck battles, and he has some skill to boot too. So, soft hands, pretty smart player. So I think we're going to see that all on display. And honestly, he has all the tools to be a pretty good third line center in this league.
Absolutely. And I'm going to read the lines right now because that seems like a pretty good segue because as you're talking about the third line center, the Penguins, they kind of have a little bit of a vacancy there, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So on the first, the top six stays intact from the last game. We've got Anthony Beauvillier, Sidney Crosby, and Rickard Rakell. Then we've got Michael Bunting and Brian Rust flanking Evgeny Malkin. And so here's the third line. This is where it gets interesting. You've got Jesse Puljujarvi playing on the left side, which is his offside, but,
okay.
Third line center right now is Drew O'Connor. Now, he has played center before, but it has been a long time, and to my memory, he has not ever played center in the NHL, only in the AHL and in college. And then on the right side, you've got Sam Poulin. Then the fourth line, welcome back Matt Nieto, his first game since November 30th, 2023. You've got Noel Acciari as your fourth line center and Valtteri Puustinen.
Yeah. So, there's room to slot into that lineup, and this is going to be very performance-based.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing to keep an eye on too, because you have these other guys, all the P's, the Polans, the Puusinens, the Puljujarvis, Ponomarovs.
And now the Pickerings, 5 P's in a pod.
Yes, and that's another guy we should take a second to talk about here. So, I think a lot of people didn't really expect this recall so soon for Pickering. To be fair, he did have a good camp. He hasn't produced a whole lot in Wilkes-Barre, but he is playing a very strong defensive game, which is what the Penguins as an organization wanted to see out of him. So he's kind of doing all those things right. Mike Sullivan mentioned that this recall was partly because of performance and also out of necessity. But because Crystal Tang did not make the trip, so we should note that too. So he's definitely not playing tonight. But, Pickering's a guy, obviously first round pick by the Penguins a few years ago. And I think to some people, his development in some areas, I don't want to say hasn't gone as expected. But, I think people are expecting a lot of Owen Pickering. And, whether or not we actually get to see him in a game here this weekend is the jury's still out. We don't know what Letang's status is going to be tomorrow night. So, I'm really excited about this guy. I think he kind of started to establish more of an identity as more of a shutdown defenseman. We've seen what he can do on the offensive blue line. We saw that in the Prospects Challenge. We saw that in training camp a little bit. He didn't get too much time in terms of games and training camp, but all the stuff is there. And if you look at the Penguins defensive core right now, he could pretty much slot in and probably play better than pretty much anyone. And I don't think that's really a stretch to say that either, with how inconsistent the Pens D core has been this season.
No, you're right. But one more thing to remember, when he, if and when he does slot into the NHL, he is the type of player that there needs to be some patience for, because he's a long, lanky defenseman, and those typically take longer to develop and put it all together at the NHL level. You've got Marcus Pettersson. He struggled for a long time before developing into the shutdown defenseman that he's become known for. Obviously, he struggled a bit this season, but, it's still case in point. He remains to be my prime example. So, when Pickering does play, You got to give him room to grow, give him a little room to breathe.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Absolutely. And, I do think we're kind of going to transition a little bit here because despite, there's a lot of players underperforming, there are also some players that are playing pretty well. And I know Hannah wanted to talk about this. I actually did too. There is one guy on the Penguins right now that I don't think is necessarily getting enough love, and that's Anthony Beauvillier.
Yeah, absolutely. Great minds think alike, Kelsey. Let's talk about Anthony Beauvillier. It's been a long time since Penguins fans saw a number 72 on Sidney Crosby's wing. Now, granted, Anthony Beauvillier is much smaller than Patrick Hornqvist, but still jarring to see the 72 there. Gives people a little bit of flashback. But he's been pretty good this year. Number one, he's played all 18 games, and I've always said that the best ability is availability. He's got 5 goals and 6 points. He's only taken 1 penalty, which is a good thing. Especially considering the Penguins' defensive concerns. But yeah, in his last 5 games, he's really stepped it up. He's got a goal and 2 straight, and 5 hits in his last 2 games. In his last 2 games, he has a goal in each and 5 hits. Yeah. That's not bad, especially considering again his size. He's pretty slight, but he's been doing all the little things right. Even with that size, he's very good at battling for position in front of the net. He's good at, making himself available and open in the slot for redirections. And he's very, very good at redirecting pucks. He's really fast and he's using that speed to his advantage. He's very smart, and we're reminded why Sidney Crosby works so well with smart players. Now he's got 2. He's got Kyrell and Anthony Beauvillier. They're both smart players. And obviously, Beauvillier, he doesn't have the same skill set that Jake Gensel does. But, you see just a little bit of similarity there in terms of knowing where to be. And again, with the redirections. But yeah, he's winning puck battles. He's playing well defensively. And again, just using that speed to back check. He's really, really good at getting back. He's just zipping up and down the ice.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you. And I actually did ask Sullivan about Beauvillier the other day. And especially, just asking him what's working for him so well, especially on that top line alongside Sid. And what he said is that, he uses his speed to create opportunities for his line mates. And if you watch him play, that's very evident. This guy can skate. And Sullivan kind of cited the example of Brian Rust and why Brian Rust has worked so well with Sid in the past. Brian Rust has kind of those similar kind of smarts, and he also can skate. And he's good on the forecheck, as is Beauvillier. Obviously, Rust has a little bit of size advantage. Not going to spend all day comparing them, but it's one of those things where if you have Sid, like you said, he needs smart players. But he needs that guy that's going to go to the dirty areas, that's going to be able to, help back check, get back on pucks, help with D-zone retrievals and breakouts and everything of the like. And he's also really good on the rush. So, this is a guy that Sid likes to play with these types of players because, as Sullivan mentioned, his speed opens up those opportunities for, a guy like Sid and a guy like Kirkell to do what they do best, which is score and, really carry the offense on the line. So I think just that those 3 players and their styles are just marrying really well and gelling really well on that line. And I think they have a little bit of everything, and that's why it's working so well. And it's kind of similar to, you think, with Rust, Crosby, Gensel. Obviously, the skill level isn't quite where it was with that. But even if you take Kirkell and Beauvillier, I think they have elements of their game that, Gensel had and Rust had, because Kirkell has the finishing ability. He has the IQ. He uses physicality. He uses forechecking to kind of create space. And then Beauvillier does so with his speed, kind of akin to Russ. So there's a little bit of everything on that line. And I think out of everyone else on this roster right now, this is the best deployment for the Pens top 6.
Absolutely. And if he keeps playing like this, he's probably going to fetch a decent haul at the trade deadline. When he was signed to his 1-year contract, basically the moment it was inked, everyone kind of knew that was, going to be trade deadline bait. But he's got 5, he's got 5 goals. He's on pace for 23. And if he keeps this up, that's not going to be a bad return at the deadline.
Yeah, and also that would be a career high for him. That would be the best mark of his career, and Excellent. He's on pace to best that right now, which was 21 previously with the Islanders. So, speaking of players that are playing very well, we're going to have a little segment on each of our episodes, and just going to be trending up and trending down. So we're going to talk about one player each from each of us, so 4 players total, that, one's trending up, one's trending down. So, Hannah, do you have the sound bites?
I am ready. Kelsey, who is trending up?
Well, hold on. I do want to say, too, that just to let you know, we're going to have some sound effects. Hannah has this fancy little soundboard that she's working with.
I was going to surprise them, Kelsey. What the heck?
Listen.
You've ruined it. The spoilers. What the heck? Spoilers, Kelsey.
But I still think they'll be surprised for some other sound effects later. But, this is our first time podcasting on our own. I think we've each been on podcasts, but we haven't actually done our own podcast.
We've never been running the show, so you please bear with us. There might be some growing pains. We will be doing our absolute bests
to keep you entertained. Also talk hockey, but Hannah's got all the fun tools and toys, and I got all the boring behind the scenes stuff. So
yes, as it should be, as I specifically requested.
All right, but who is trending up? Kelsey, here we go.
Kelsey, you're starting. Who's trending up, Kelsey?
Yeah, I asked myself by accident there. So trending up.
We talk to ourselves sometimes. There's nothing to be ashamed of,
especially with the state of this Penguins team. All right.
Can I get an amen?
My trending up player is Brian Rust. Woo!
Tell us about Brian Rust.
I absolutely will. So Brian Rust, I don't think it's any secret, and maybe it is, but this guy really struggled to start the season.
It's not a secret.
And he was up on the top line with Sid. He had 3 goals, 4 points in those first 9 games. And granted, he did start the season on IR. He was injured in training camp with a lower body injury. But even despite that, it never really looked like he got to his game, by offensively and defensively. That whole line was a mess for the first 10 games. It's one of those things. You look at the defensive numbers, he's pretty much by every measure been the worst defensive player on this team, and that's saying a lot. However, I think a lot of things are starting to trend in the right direction for him since coming off of his second IR stint when he was reunited with Evgeny Malkin and Michael Bunting. And, I think there's a dose of he's probably healthy that is playing into this because, he had a lower body injury. I can imagine that was affecting his ability to really play the game that suits him well, which, he uses his skating to his advantage. And when you have an injury like that, it's probably really hard to play that way. So he wasn't skating quite what we've seen from him, but he's starting to do that again. And we saw, against Washington, he did his patented Brian Rust power move, and, he swooped in. Evgeny Malkin picked up the loose change, put home the rebound for a goal, and then he did the same move the other day against Detroit and scored a goal on that one. So when Brian Rust starts to skate well and he's starting to do things like that, and you see him engaged in that way, his game is trending up. And I do think that once, that starts to gel, good things are going to happen for him on both sides of the puck. And I think it also helps that he has some chemistry with Michael Bunting. I personally think that he should be Gino's de facto winger. Their styles they're very good together, and they have been. So I'm looking for Brian Rust to keep trending up here. So who do you got, Hannah?
My player who's trending up is Michael Bunting. Michael Bunting is another player that had a very rough start to the season. He saw fourth line minutes. He was demoted a lot in the lineup. He was even healthy scratched one game. And production aside, he just wasn't playing his game. He wasn't playing Michael Bunting hockey. When Bunting is at his best, he's kind of playing rat hockey. He's being a pest. He's getting under opponents' skins. He's getting engaged after the whistles with some extracurriculars. He's throwing hits. He's in the blue paint, causing, wreaking havoc on the goalies. And he wasn't really doing that. And he was losing puck battles constantly. He was so snake bitten. He was, absolutely whiffing on shots and giving up golden opportunities. And it was really rough and concerning to see, especially since he played such a large part in the Penguins' late season surge last year. But in the past 5 games, he's really kind of come alive and he's really refound himself. He's got 2 goals and an assist in his last 5 games, and he's also got 11 hits, which is very important because when you watch Bunting play, when he throws a hit or takes a hit, it kind of gets him going. Like, you can just see that it gets him fired up, when he's getting chippy after the whistle or he's, throwing hits, throwing the body around. That's what really gets him driving, and you can kind of see it on the next shift. He's all fired up. And he's just looking so much more engaged. He's looking a little bit more alive. He was really just doing cardio at the beginning of the season, but now he's making things happen. It's very nice to see because it was getting concerning.
It was, and this is a guy that the Penguins need to produce, and same goes for us. I mean, especially with the loss of Gensel, they need to offset that. And, this top 6 has struggled at times this season. And it's really good to see, especially those 2 players start to come around, because for a while there, even before Sidney Crosby started to heat up, Malkin and Raquel were pretty much carrying the offensive load on this team. So it's nice to see kind of everybody starting to contribute and chip in that top 6. And that's why it needs to stay the way it is. And, another thing, too, just a side note with Rust and Bunting, too, I think it's noteworthy that they started to play better as the team started to play better, because we're going to pretend Monday never happened. Take out Monday.
What's Monday?
That's a great question, Hannah. I don't know what happened Monday. There certainly wasn't a hockey game that day. But anyway, taking out Monday, the Penguins have been playing better hockey since, their 6-game losing streak earlier this season, which really put them down in the standings. So I think it's worth
not that
noting,
far down. They only sit 3 points out of a wild card spot, Kelsey.
Crazier things have happened, but I gotta say, it's the East is just the very opposite of a gauntlet this year. Yeah.
It's not even mid. It's just bad.
It is. And I think, it's one of those things. If those guys can continue to play well, I think the team's better for it. If this top 6 is operating, it's just, a better oiled machine. They're possessing the puck. They're controlling more play. And that's only a good thing for the Penguins. But
yeah, at the very least, it'll be a more entertaining product on the ice for the fans. They clearly, like we said, did not enjoy Monday's efforts. So, these 2 top 6 wingers producing would definitely, spark the team a little bit. But we're gonna move on to our second part of this segment, which is trending down. So we've got 2 sound effects that we're considering that we would like you guys to vote on. We're gonna have a Twitter poll. I wonder if there's a way to get a poll on Spotify. I think actually.
I don't know. I have to look into it.
I've seen polls before. We're going to have to look into that, but we're going to get some polls going, and we're going to let you guys vote. You guys decide. Like Kelsey said, we really want this to be as interactive as possible. So this sound effect is labeled awkward, and this is a great one. Get ready. Sounds a little bit like ravens, not really awkward. But moving on from that, this is our second one. I'm not even going to say what it's called. Ow! So you guys can vote. We're going to use the first one just because I think the second one makes me and Kelsey lose it a little bit too much just for this episode. If you guys want to see Kelsey, giggle on camera, that is fine by us. We'll take it for the team. But Kelsey, who's your player that's trending down?
So my player that is trending down is Jack St. Ivany. Thank you. So yeah, St. Ivany, he's a young defenseman that had a pretty good season for the Penguins last year. And I think a lot of people were kind of excited to see him build on that this season. And even in training camp, he was one of the few defensemen that were waiver exempt. Going into training camp, which, as everyone should know by now, waiver exemption plays a very large role in roster decisions. So, I mean, you had guys like John Ludwig, had Sebastian Aho, even Ryan Shea, who he's mostly been besting for playing time this season. All those guys were in the mix for kind of that one final spot. And St. Ivany earned it. I think he earned it a little bit on merit last season. And I mean, him and Ryan Graves had a nice training camp together. And I do think Ryan Graves is still playing pretty solid hockey right now. However, can't say the same.
We're not talking about him.
Yeah. We're talking about St. Ivany. I don't think the case has been the same here. I mean, in a bottom pairing role, you don't expect a guy to produce much. He does only have 1 assist on the season. He's a -4. Which on the surface, those numbers aren't terrible, right? I mean, again, for bottom pair defensemen, you don't expect much in terms of raw numbers. But I do think, when you're looking at ice time and when you're looking at some other stats that kind of tell a little bit more grim of a picture, he does already have 9 giveaways and 3 defensive zone giveaways, which doesn't seem like a whole lot, but he's getting a whole lot less ice time than, a lot of the top guys. And I do think, too, I mean, we've seen several instances of St. Ivany struggling on the penalty kill, just with positioning. Very much a struggle in the defensive zone for positioning. And a lot of times, honestly, when I'm watching, goals against, when that pairing is on the ice, I think a lot of it is, chalked up to something St. Ivany's doing rather than Graves this year. So it's just kind of, I don't want to say it's concerning quite yet. This is still a young guy. The Penguins are still really high on him, and there's a good chance he finds his game, somewhere along the line here. But I'd say, at the very least, it is a bit concerning that, we're 18 games into the season and there hasn't been much improvement on that front.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And like you said, there's still time to turn it around. With Bunting and Rust, their play kind of turned around when the team started playing well. So, we can only hope that the same will be said soon for Jack St. Ivany. But yeah.
Yeah, and he'll also be elevated tonight in Columbus in the lineup. So
yes, he is playing on the second pairing with Matt Grzelcyk, which means that Ryan Graves will be playing with Ryan Shea. We'll be calling that the Ryan squared pairing. And then obviously the top pairing is Marcus Pettersson and Erik Karlsson.
Yes. So, I mean, we'll see what happens.
And Tristan Jarry is in goal, by the way. His first start since... It's been a minute.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But, Hannah, I do want to talk about who's trending down for you.
That would be Drew O'Connor. Let's talk about Drew O'Connor. All right. Last season, he ended the season, when the Penguins were on their little hot streak push towards the end of it. He was playing on Sidney Crosby's wing. He played very admirably. He stepped up. That is not the case this year. offensively, he's not generating a lot of offense. He's not creating chances. He's just kind of out there skating. It's not great, you know? I mean, I'm not going to say there's nothing going on because there's quite a lot going on. It's just not good. According to Hockey Stat Card, he has a negative 2.3 offensive rating, which is good for worst on the team. That is bad. He has a negative 0.22 game score, which is the third worst on the team. Negative 22 would be catastrophic. Oh, my Lord.
I don't think he'd be playing NHL hockey.
Yeah. It is negative 0.22, once again, not negative 22. And he's only got a 39.9% on ice expected goal share, which is also third worst on the team. Again, he is only behind Jack St. Ivany and Ryan Shea. That's not good.
Yeah, that's not good, and especially considering the fact that Jack St. Ivany and Ryan Shea are bottom pairing defensemen.
Yeah, and not offensive guys. So it's like he's last on the team because it's like you got to exclude them. They're not really known for generating a lot of offense. But this is especially bad because he's also not doing well defensively. He has a negative 1.3 defensive rating. Once again, Hockey Stat Card, really great. Give them a follow.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that 39.9% on ice expected goal share, that also factors in defensively. He allows 5.13 on ice high danger shot attempts against per 60. That basically, if you're unfamiliar with advanced analytics, that basically means that for every 60 minutes he plays, he gives up just over 5 high danger shot attempts against. That's not good. He's also got 4.13 on ice expected goals against per 60, which is good for second worst on the team. So again, there's a lot going on defensively, and it's not good. And, if you'll allow me to put my tinfoil hat on for a second, the fact that he is slotting in at third line center is a little concerning right now, especially since Sam Poulin is a center and has been playing center, played center for most of Wednesday's game. Although when Blake Lizotte got hurt, Mike Sullivan resorted to, some bottom six shuffling just because he was down a bottom six player. So it didn't always pan out that way. But I mean, with Ponomarev in the wings, it's a little concerning that you've got O'Connor in the center, which is not his natural position, or at least it hasn't been for a long time.
Yeah. It is his natural position, technically.
But it hasn't been for a long time.
Yeah.
Am I crazy for saying this, Kelsey, or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I don't think you're crazy at all. I have been very largely unimpressed with O'Connor this year. And to be truthful, he's not a top 6 guy. I mean,
no.
When O'Connor is playing at his best, he's on a third line, and he's on a third line wing, I think. And, I think there is potential for a decent third line if you have, O'Connor on that left wing, Ponomarev in the center, maybe someone like Poulin or Puljujarvi on the right side. That has some potential there. But the way he's playing defensively, I just don't think the center position is the best idea right now. Now, Mike Sullivan did say they're kind of experimenting a little bit with, because of their center injuries and the lack of depth right now, they're going to be experimenting a little with different guys in that position. So I think we will see Ponomarev there possibly. But, we'll just have to see how it goes. And I'm actually glad you brought up Drew O'Connor because this brings us to our very last segment.
We are one more thing about Drew O'Connor. He has not recorded a point in 12 straight games, which led him to shave his head, as reported by Joe Brand.
Yes. Hopefully it works for him, because getting to the next thing, which we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to get to the subject of trades.
Yes,
and
let's.
Hannah, there is some speculation going on about somebody you may or may not have just mentioned.
Yeah, so as per Elliot Friedman in the 32 Thoughts podcast, this was the written edition, he said that there's been some buzz around 2 players on the Penguins that may or may not be next on the chopping block. and those would be the aforementioned Drew O'Connor and also Marcus Pettersson. Now, both of these players do make sense because they're both going to be unrestricted free agents at the end of this year. So they're on expiring contracts, which would make them great rentals for a contender. But it seems like this might be happening a lot sooner than a lot of us thought. This doesn't seem like it's going to be like a February, an early March deadline move. This could be a very, very, very soon.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. And I think this is going to be an interesting story to keep an eye on because, I mean, there's a lot of reports out there saying the Penguins are going to be active in the trade market. I think we mentioned before, Kyle Dubas is rebuilding on the fly. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a mixture of moves to, stockpile draft picks, moves for the future. But they might also look into some of those trades for somebody like Drew O'Connor where you can swap him with another player. Maybe another guy who's on a expiring contract or, somebody sees upside in him. You can maybe flip him for, a pick or two. But I think if we see someone like O'Connor dealt, it's probably going to be more of a swap for another NHL player, I would think anyway. Pettersson, this is a whole other conversation for another time, but Pettersson has struggled a bit this season, but his stock's still high. I mean, they're still going to get basic on merit alone. They're going to get something for him. But another guy I want to keep an eye on too in the coming weeks and months is Alex Nedeljkovic. I know we've talked goaltending. As Hannah said, Tristan Jarry is getting his first start of the season. Joel Blomqvist was just optioned on Thursday. So, for a while there, the Penguins were carrying 3 goaltenders. They can't carry 3 goaltenders forever. And really, if you take out this Dallas game, again, Joel Blomqvist has been their best goaltender this season.
Absolutely, by far. By far he has. I mean, if you look at all of their stats, he's got the best record. Now, it's not a great record, but to be fair, the Penguins don't have a great record. He's played 8 games, started 7. He's gone 3-5-0, 3.6 goals against average, which is, maybe not great, but he's, that Dallas game did not help. He's got a .904 save percentage, which is 0.02 higher than the next highest save percentage, which would be Alex Nedeljkovic at .884. So yeah, he's by far been the Penguins' best goaltender. Again, Dallas game, we're pretending that didn't happen, kind of, because that was a stinker for everybody.
Yeah, and I do want to make a note, too, that going into that Dallas game, Joel Blomqvist was right outside the top 10 in goaltending. I mean, he had a .913 save percentage, .325 goals against average going into that game. So, I mean, that game really messed up his stats.
Yeah,
he was really tracking well there. But, I think this situation's interesting because in an ideal world, Tristan Jarry puts together a really good stretch of games here, and then the Penguins are able to deal him because I think Blomqvist is the future at the position. They want him at the NHL level. Unfortunately, there's just 2 guys blocking him right now. And with Jarry's contract, if they can't move it, I would expect to see Nedeljkovic dealt at some point because, this is a guy, teams need goaltending. There are a lot of teams across the league this year that need goaltending. Colorado comes to mind. Utah comes to mind. There's teams that are trying to contend that really need an upgrade at that position. Nedeljkovic is a good guy that, can provide a steady presence as a backup, as kind of like a 1B. So, I mean, he'll be pretty relatively easy to trade. So I think if Tristan Jarry plays himself out of being tradable, which he may have already done that, expect to see Nedeljkovic on the move at some point.
Yeah, I mean, Nedeljkovic, he's got, he's making way less money than Tristan Jarry, which makes him a lot easier to deal. And like you said, he's really more of a really, a very quality backup or a fringe 1B. So as the the trend of tandems kind of starts to rise among teams, that's really attractive. Especially to teams who already have, a good 1A and they just need that second piece. So he's going to be a lot easier and more likely to be moved than someone like Tristan Jarry. Yeah, I mean, I think we're just gonna watch Jari and Ned kind of fight it out for a little um, while Blomqvist. It's unfortunate that he's in the AHL because it really does feel like there's not a lot he can get out of that other than consistent reps. Um, but he'll be playing consistently. He'll be starting. I guess the best thing for him is if Jari and Ned figure out whatever's going on and figure that out soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the Penguins as an organization, they want to make sure that they can give Blomqvist a shot at the NHL level. Yeah. But yeah, I do just want to add just as one final thing here. You mentioned Drew O'Connor being on the trade block. I've been clamoring for this forever. Send him to Toronto. Get Nicholas Robertson over here. Do that swap. Robertson has 1 goal on the season. He's struggling a little bit. They're both pending unrestricted free agents. Get him over here. Get him over here.
I still think it's more likely that Robertson is traded to Los Angeles for Kaliev, but listen, you can peddle the Nick Robertson. You can really push that narrative. I'm not going to stop you. I think there's.
Listen, I take Kaliev too. He was on my list too. So
he's on injured reserve still,
yes,
but
he is on injured reserve. But to be honest with you, I'd take either of those players over Drew O'Connor right now. So
I agree. It feels like those two guys have a little bit more to give offensively, which this team is lacking. I mean, they're also lacking defense, but it's not like Drew O'Connor is doing that. So
yeah. As we said, so
as we got into in detail.
But yeah,
we're sorry this episode ran a little bit long. You can blame the Penguins for making this week so gosh darn interesting and jam packed with action and adventure. We're usually going to try to keep these around 30-35 minutes at most. And again, this is normally going to be a Wednesday afternoon release, but unfortunately, like we said, this week was crazy. We just couldn't film Wednesday because, we already would have missed, if we had released it Wednesday, we would have missed the game and like 4 transactions and an illness for Chris Letang, which made him unable to travel to Columbus. You guys would have missed all of this. But yeah, it's going to be a Wednesday afternoon thing. And we can't wait to see you guys again on Wednesday.
Yeah, and as I mentioned at the beginning too, please give us some feedback. You're going to be able to find this on YouTube. You'll find this on Spotify. Tell us about it on X. Tell us about it on Blue Sky, Threads, wherever you consume this podcast or wherever you decide to complain about it.
Send us messages via carrier pigeon. Send us signal flares. Yeah. We don't care.
Whatever you got.
And again, we're going to have a poll where you guys can vote on the trending Dan Sand.
I like that, the trending Dan Sand.
Thank you. I really
did a good job.
I gave it a good crack. I gave it my all.
Yeah, you did. You're becoming more of a Pittsburgher every single day, Hannah.
Oh, good. It's only been 7 months.
All right. Well, that'll do it. As a reminder, you can find me on Twitter, on Threads, on Blue Sky at Kelsey_Surmacz. For Hannah, do you want to remind them where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at H_Kirk6. Blue Sky is the same, but without the underscore, so just HKirk6. And then I'm on Threads at Kirkell6. And as a reminder, you can also read what Kelsey writes on the Hockey News. She is great. And we can't wait to see you guys again next week.
Yeah, we can't wait to do this again. Thank you for tuning in. And again, share with everybody you know. We'd love to get the word out. So we will see you next Wednesday.
Have a good one, folks. Hopefully there are no new transactions, which make this podcast have a very short shelf life. Not that already happened or nothing.
Not at all. It's not as if we stayed up till 4:30 in the morning.
No, surely not. Who would do that?
Yeah, who would do that? Anyway, have a good one, Yins. And stay out of trouble in that.